We'll now start with the reading curriculum that will teach us about the mortgage-backed sector of the bond market. As the name suggests, these will be bonds backed by mortgages or whose regular payments are coming from a pool of mortgages. So we'll begin the chapter by first understanding how a residential mortgage works, or how does one loan work and how it gets paid off over time. And then we'll understand how we can create securities out of a pool of these loans and see what will be the risk and return characteristics of these securities. So a mortgage is a loan that is collateralized with a specific piece of real estate, either residential or commercial. The interest rate on this loan is generally fixed. That is, it is not a floating rate loan. The interest rate is generally fixed for a fairly long term, and this rate is called the mortgage rate or the contract rate. A fixed rate, level payment, fully amortized mortgage loan, which is the general form in which the mortgage is, that is, there is a fixed rate and then a fixed payment is made every month or every year that will fully pay off this loan, that is the interest as well as the principal. Requires equal monthly payments, each consisting of an interest component and a principal component. The monthly interest component is based on the amount of outstanding principal at the beginning of the month. The incremental reduction of outstanding principal is referred to as scheduled amortization or scheduled principal repayment. In that mortgage rate or the contract rate, it is not just the interest but also a servicing fee that will be built so as to cover the cost of payment, collection and other administrative activities. So this rate will have all that, the rate of interest plus all the administrative costs. Consider a 20-year 800,000 level payment fully amortized mortgage with a fixed rate of 15%. Calculate the monthly payment and prepare an amortization schedule for the first 3 months. The loan that we have taken is an amount equal to 800,000, or the present value is equal to 800,000. We are paying this loan over 20 years. So the number of periods will be 20 into 12, that is 240 months is over which we are paying off the loan. The interest rate is given to be 15%, or on a monthly basis, this can be calculated as 15 divided by 12. The future value is going to be 0 because it is a fully amortized mortgage. That is, at the end of 20 years, there should be no outstanding principal left. We need to compute the payments, which will come out to be a negative number. That is the monthly outgo that we need to make so as to pay off this mortgage entirely. That's the first part. So first we'll compute the monthly payment and then we will prepare an amortization schedule. So let's do it. We'll enter 800,000 as PV, enter 240 as N, 15 divided by 12, that is 1.25 as I by Y, 0 as FV, and compute PMT. The PMT comes out to be 10,534 negative, means I need to pay this much every month so as to be able to pay off this entire loan in a period of 20 years. We'll store this value in the memory register 1 in case we need it for the future. So PMT is 10,534, or that is the amount of payments that need to be made. Now, very importantly, remember that the interest paid is always equal to the outstanding principal multiplied by the rate at issuance. It's a fixed rate mortgage. Hence, changes in interest rates will not affect our payments because our rate is fixed. So in every period, the interest payment will be the outstanding principal multiplied by the rate at issuance. Whatever I'm paying over and above this, I'm paying a total of 10,534. So whatever is over and above this value will be my principal repayment in that particular month or that period. Let's compute for the first month. What will be the interest payment equal to? The outstanding principal is entire 800,000 and the rate at issuance is 1.25%. In the first month, this is the amount of interest that I need to pay, which can be calculated as 800,000 into 0.0125. That will come out to be $10,000. So we are actually paying an amount equal to 10,534. You can recall one. This is the amount that we are actually paying, whereas the interest part of this is only 10,000. So the principal repaid at the end of the first month will be 534.3166. So interest is 10,000. That is the first month, and principal repaid at the end of the first month will be approximately $534. Now for the second month, the outstanding principal will be reduced to the extent of $534.6 and the interest part will be 10% of this. So please note, the interest will keep coming down because the outstanding principal is coming down. Our payment remains the same, however. So principal repaid will keep going up. Now we can keep doing this calculation. However, I would like to explain one sheet on the calculator that will do this quite easily for us. It's called the amortization sheet in the calculator. Press the button second and press amort. You will see P1 is equal to 1. That means our beginning period is period 1. Scroll down and you will see P2 is also equal to 1. So our ending period is also 1. What we're trying to see is, in the first period, since P1 and P2 are both 1, how much principal have we repaid? How much interest have we repaid? Scroll down, you will get the principal balance as 799,465.68, which is the same as 800,000 minus 536. Scroll down again, you will see that the principal repayment is 534.3166. Scroll down again, you will see that the interest payment is equal to 10,000, just the way you had calculated. If you want to see the same amounts for the second period, then it's not difficult. Go back, enter P1 as 2, enter P2 also as 2. So we are asking the calculator, only in the second period, how much is the principal we have repaid, how much is the interest we have repaid, and also tell us the balance principal after the second period. As you scroll down, you will see the balance, and you can verify this from your own calculation also. The 8,000 minus 534 will be our remaining balance, multiplied by 10% will be the interest. Whatever we've paid over and above that interest, that is 10,534 minus that interest, will be our principal repayment. So after the second installment, this is the balance remaining. In the second period, the principal repaid has been more, has been 540 this time. As we saw, the interest component will keep becoming lower and the principal component will keep going higher, and the interest would be 993.32. So with P1 and P2, we can input any value practically. So if we enter P1 as 1, for instance, and we enter P2 as 185, there are 240 periods in total. Then what we're asking the calculator is, from the first period to the 185th period, how much interest have we paid, how much principal have we paid, and what is the balance principal after the 185th period. That's how you can use the amortization sheet to compute the amortization schedule for the loan. It will not be asked in the exam, but still it's a useful calculation and a useful sheet that you should know how to apply. Now, a very relevant and important risk in the case of mortgages is that of prepayment. Prepayments are payments in excess of the required monthly amount. So you're supposed to pay 10,534. If suppose we pay 11,000, then whatever excess we have paid will go on to reduce our principal, and hence the interest that the bank will earn will also go down, because the interest at any period is the outstanding principal multiplied by the rate at issuance. Payments for less than the outstanding principal balance are called curtailments. So if we just made 11,000, that means we haven't prepaid the loan fully. There's still a lot of principal remaining, but have we curtailed our principal a little bit? Yes, because our principal due will now be lower to the extent of this excess payment. If we fully prepay the entire loan, that is in one shot we pay this period's interest also, and whatever is the outstanding balance, then that will be called a full prepayment. Prepayments or curtailments will reduce the amount of interest the lender receives over the life of the loan as principal becomes lesser. Prepayment risk refers to the likelihood that prepayments or curtailments will actually occur or will keep occurring. The remainder of the chapter will focus a lot on this prepayment risk and see what are the various structures that can be created to get around this risk, or how is this risk reflected in the securities. So if we've understood what a mortgage is, or what a loan, a residential loan essentially is, and how it gets prepaid, then understanding mortgage pass-through securities is fairly simple. A bank or an originator will not give out one loan, he'll give out hundreds, thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of loans to various individuals for purchasing residential property, etc. All these mortgages that the bank has given will bring the bank scheduled principal and interest repayments. Those amounts will keep coming, or those fixed payments will keep coming. There may be prepayments, but if there are no prepayments, then that fixed amount from each loan is expected to come, a part of it representing interest, a part of it representing principal repayment. If the originator or the bank needs some upfront money for whatever reason, he may have a better opportunity to invest in, or he may not want to be in the residential business anymore, or for whatever reason, if the originator wants to take these loans off its own books, can he sell them to other investors who are willing to purchase into these assets at a particular discount rate and with a particular yield? Some investors will be interested in buying out these assets. So how that normally happens is that the originator will segregate or will separate these assets, or rather sell them to a special purpose vehicle. So the originator first dissociates himself completely from these mortgages. So these mortgages are in this SPV. This SPV will have a particular servicer. Servicer is the party responsible for collecting the payments of this $10, $25 from this mortgage pool and bringing it to the SPV. The SPV then creates another set of securities. So there will be money coming in from these mortgage loans, and the SPV will create another security called a mortgage-backed security, or MBS. So let's assume there are 1,000 investors. So the SPV may issue 1,000 bonds, each bond representing a claim on 1/1000 of these cash flows. So whatever are the cash flows coming from these loans will be split amongst these 1,000 bonds. Various investors can purchase these bonds and will then have a claim on the underlying pool or the underlying mortgage. In a simple pass-through structure, whatever comes from these mortgages is simply passed through to the investors in proportion of the holding. If more comes, more will be passed through. If less comes, less will be passed through. More comes generally implies high prepayments. Less coming implies lower prepayments. Defaults are generally uncommon in mortgages because in most countries, and especially in the US, mortgages are insured by the government. So there are various government agencies, Ginnie Mae, Freddie Mac, that essentially insure these mortgage loans. So defaults are not very common in mortgages. The essential risk is prepayment risk, because if these investors have purchased the assets and all the principal comes back very quickly to them, then they will not earn the interest. And if prepayments don't happen with the speed they were expecting, so some prepayment speed is expected because we have the history of loans available with us and we know that people after a point start prepaying. So if prepayments don't happen with that expectation, then the investors may receive their principal later or a little late. We'll understand this risk in more detail. The slide was to just explain how a securitization transaction is structured. This process is called securitization. The originator sells the assets to an SPV. The SPV further sells them to investors. Investors pay for these assets. They will pay upfront depending on a yield, and that money is given back to the originator. So the originator now has no claim on these assets. He is completely separate from the assets. The investors don't have to worry about the credit quality of the originator. They have to only worry about the credit quality of these assets. And since these are mortgages, normally the credit quality will be quite high. A mortgage pass-through security represents a claim against a pool of mortgages. Any number of mortgages may be used to form the pool. A mortgage that is included in the pool is called a securitized mortgage. Pass-through investors receive the monthly cash flows generated by the underlying pool in proportion of their holding. More than one class of pass-through security may be issued against a single mortgage pool, each representing a unique claim on the pool's cash flows. In the structure that I explained, there was only one type of pass-through security. Everybody shared the gains and the pains equally. We'll study in the coming slides that we may structure it slightly differently also, so that one set of investors take higher risk and other set of investors get a lower risk. Correspondingly, the price that they'll have to pay will be different. The most important characteristics of pass-through securities, as we discussed, is their prepayment risk, because the mortgages used as collateral for the pass-through can be prepaid. The pass-throughs themselves have significant prepayment risk. The risk of the pass-through essentially is the same as the risk of the mortgage. Mortgage has pass-through as prepayment risk, so will the pass-through securities. Credit risk, as we discussed, is generally not a big concern for residential mortgage-backed security. The speed of prepayment is measured by something called as the conditional prepayment rate. Remember, the conditional prepayment rate is an annual speed of prepayment. This is an annual rate. So if the CPR is, let's say, CPR, that means $100 loan will be prepaid, or additional principal will be paid to the extent of CPR, or the principal at the end will become 100 into 1 minus CPR. This is the conditional prepayment rate at the end of the year. This will happen after 1 year. We can calculate the equivalent monthly rate also. The equivalent monthly rate is called the single monthly mortality or SMM. So if we had $100 and SMM was paid back every month, so after the first month 100 would become 100 into 1 minus SMM. This entire amount or this remaining amount will be prepaid again the next month. So it will again become 1 minus SMM. SMM is the monthly prepayment rate. After the first month, only so much of principal is remaining. And again, SMM is prepaid. This is the rate of prepayment. So after 12 months, what will be the remaining principal on the loan? 100 into 1 minus SMM to the power 12. If we applied a CPR rate, then CPR is an annual rate. So the prepayment, after prepayment, the loan would have become 100 into 1 minus CPR. SMM is the equivalent monthly loan. So 100 would become 1 minus SMM to the power 12. If you want to compute a single monthly mortality that is equivalent to an annual rate equal to CPR, then we can compute that for a given CPR, the single monthly mortality can be calculated as 1 minus CPR to the power 1 by 12, 1 minus the same. Please note, the derivation of this formula, the way we have done, is not given in the curriculum or on any of your books. Just the formula directly is mentioned. So you do need to remember this formula, but you know how it can be derived also if need be. So if the annual speed of prepayment is given, then we can compute that annual rate into a monthly rate by applying this formula. Single monthly mortality is 1 minus CPR to the power 1 by 12. The estimated prepayment for any particular month then can be calculated as the single monthly mortality into the mortgage balance in the beginning of the month minus the scheduled principal payment for the month. So if let's say 0.1% is the SMM, then how much will be the extra payments this month? CPR is measuring prepayments, that is over and above the scheduled principal repayment. How much additional repayment is going to happen? So it will be 0.1 into, let's say $100 was the balance at the beginning, $5 let's say was the scheduled principal repayment. So 100 minus 5 into 0.1% is going to be the additional payment or the prepayment in that particular month. You can call it the additional principal repayment. We'll understand it better with an example. The conditional prepayment rate and the Public Securities Association or the PSA prepayment benchmark are industry benchmarks for assumed prepayment rates. As we discussed, we have the whole history of mortgage loans that we can analyze. So to some extent, prepayments are expected because we know people prepay their loan. The Public Securities Association collects that data and gives us some fair expectation of prepayments. At any given time, prepayments may be higher or they may be lower, but this is the general expected prepayment rate. CPR is the annual rate at which a mortgage pool balance is assumed to be prepaid during the life of the pool. A mortgage pool's CPR is a function of past prepayment rates and economic conditions. We will study soon what are the various factors affecting prepayments. We're just at the moment trying to understand some definitions and terminologies. So CPR is the annual rate of prepayment, SMM is the monthly rate of prepayment. The PSA prepayment benchmark gives us some expectations of prepayments, or what is a fair expectation that any bank should have when he's given out a mortgage. So this is some prepayment that is expected. So the PSA benchmark is expressed as a monthly series of CPRs. So the rate that PSA gives us is an annual rate. So we will have to first convert it into a monthly rate and then apply it for this particular month. For 30-year mortgages, 100% PSA standard benchmark is that for the first month, the prepayment will only be 0.2%. That is, immediately when I've taken a loan, I'm less likely to come back and prepay a lot, because if I could prepay so much, I wouldn't have taken that big a loan. So initially we've seen prepayments are low in the first 2-3 months. As time passes, in the second month, more prepayments will happen because I may have gotten more savings and more income. So in the second month, the prepayments are expected to increase by 0.2%, or they will total become 0.4% annualized rate. In the third month, prepayments will become 0.6%. In the fourth month, they will become 0.8%, so on and so forth until the 30th month, wherein the prepayments will become 30 into 0.2, that is 6%. After that, we've seen prepayments don't keep going up, or we can say that this is when the loan becomes seasoned. That is, for the 30th month to the 360th month, the prepayment rate remains high, but it remains at 6%. So 6% annualized is what people keep prepaying every month. So for computing any month's prepayment, we will first convert this CPR into a SMM and then apply the SMM, as we'll study better with an example. This is the PSA benchmark, also is called 100% PSA. That is, on an average, is what you can expect. Depending on economic conditions and depending on various factors, the actual prepayment rate may be higher or lower, as we'll just see. So for 100% PSA, what we expect is that prepayment speed will keep going up by 0.2% every month for the first 30 months. At 30 months, the prepayment speed will become 6%, which will then persist for the rest of the period. Sometimes we may expect prepayments to be higher. So in our models and in our valuation, we can model a 165% PSA. That is, every value will be multiplied by 1.65. So our increases will not be 0.2%, they will be 0.2 into 1.65. And after 30 months, our loan will mature at 30 into 1.65 and then become seasoned at that level. So 165% PSA means that every value of 100% PSA is multiplied by 1.65. That is, we are expecting prepayments to be much higher than the PSA benchmark. If you're expecting prepayments to be lower, and how we can make these expectations, we'll just see. We can model a 70% PSA. That means each of these values is multiplied by 0.7. So our loan eventually will become seasoned at 2.6 into 0.7, that is 4.2%. Compute the CPR and SMM for the 7th and the 20th months, assuming 150 PSA and 200 PSA. First, let's compute the CPR. So for the 7th month for 100% PSA, it would have been 7 into 0.2, that is 1.4%. For a 150 PSA, this would be 1.5 times 1.4%, that is 2.1%. but this is the CPR. We can compute the equivalent monthly rate as 1 minus CPR to the power 1 by 12. So it will be 1 minus 0.021 to the power 1 by 12, which comes out to be approximately 0.177%. Similarly, we can do it for the 20th month. It will be 20 into 0.2 into 1.5. That is the CPR, assuming a 150 PSA. For a 200 PSA, we would multiply all calculations by 2 rather than 1.5. That's how we can calculate the CPR and the single monthly mortality by applying the formula. So please do the rest of the calculations on your own and please verify the answers. So approximately 0.18% is what we derived. Assume that you have invested in a mortgage pool with a $500,000 principal balance outstanding at the beginning of the 20th month. The scheduled monthly principal payment is $100. Borrowing from the previous example, the CPR and SMM, assuming the 150 PSA, are 6% and 0.5143% respectively. Compute the payment for the 20th month. So remember, the prepayment will be given as the principal balance minus the scheduled prepayment or the scheduled principal repayment, that is $100, into the single monthly mortality. This is the amount of prepayment that will happen in that month. So into 0.5143%. This will be the amount of the prepayment, which comes out to be so over and above the $100 of scheduled payment, we are expected to pay about $2,570 as prepayment. And this prepayment will reduce our outstanding principal, hence will reduce our interest outgo in the future. Now, a very important concept is of the average life of pass-through securities. Now, average life is something like the duration. For general bonds, we calculated duration as the weighted average time to maturity. That was one definition of duration, or the average time to wait for all cash flows. Now, for pass-through securities, it's tough to define because the cash flows itself are not fixed. For a general bond, a fixed payment bond, we can calculate duration because the coupons and the principal repayment is fixed. In the case of pass-through securities, an important metric that we calculate is the average life. That is again the average time to wait for all cash flows, or the average time in which we will get our money back. If prepayments are very high, what do you think will happen to the average life? It will come down as people will pay us back sooner. If prepayments are low, then the average life will get extended. So investors calculate the average life or weighted average life for pass-through securities, since prepayment risk usually results in the stated maturity of a pass-through being different than its actual life. As mortgage rates fall, people will not stick to our high fixed rate. They will refinance. They will repay us back and refinance from somewhere else. Hence, the average life of our loan will decrease. As mortgage rates rise, people will stick to our low rate that they have already locked in. Hence, prepayment rates will slow down and average life of our pass-through will increase. What are the factors that affect prepayments? So we understood first would be the prevailing mortgage rate. If it is lower than the fixed rate, then prepayments will be high. If the prevailing mortgage rate is higher than what they have already locked in with us, then prepayments will be low. So prepayments first of all depend on the prevailing mortgage rate, and on that it is the spread between the current mortgage rate and the original mortgage rate that matters the most. Historically, if this spread increases by more than 2%, then refinancing activity increases dramatically, because even after considering the costs and inconvenience, it is quite profitable for the borrower to refinance, that is, pay us back and refinance at this 2% lower rate. The path that mortgage rates follow will also have an impact on prepayments. So when mortgage rates drop, rebound and drop again, so they drop, rebound, and then they have dropped again, then in the second drop, prepayment is not very high, because people are already more or more so locked at the lower rate. In this rise, there would have been relatively fewer loans issued. So the first time that the rates fall to the 5% level, for instance, refinancing will be very high. The second time when they fall to 5%, the refinancing will not be as high. That's what makes the modeling of the cash flows of mortgage-backed securities very difficult, or even tougher, because it's not just the level of rate, it's the path that interest rates have taken to come to that level also that matters. So when mortgage rates drop, rebound and drop again, most homeowners have already refinanced during the first drop, so prepayments will not be as high. This tendency is called refinancing burnout. Housing turnover increases as mortgage rates fall and housing becomes more affordable, and the general level of economic activity increases. This normally also results in higher prepayments. So generally, when economy is in a good condition, we've seen that prepayments increase. People have more money to prepay basically. Prepayments are also affected by seasoning and property location. So we studied seasoning, that is, after 30 months, prepayments don't keep increasing. They increase initially. So right after the loan, prepayment is lower. As time passes, they keep increasing until the time when we saw after 30 months on an average, we've seen the loan become seasoned, that is, prepayments don't, or rate doesn't increase after that. And also the property location. In some locations, we've seen higher turnover in housing, higher refinancing, higher prepayments than others. Other factors also affect. Sometimes spring and fall also, we've seen that people buy more houses during the spring, and hence prepayments begin towards the fall, so on and so forth. But these are the most important factors that affect prepayments. Now, prepayment risk broadly is of two types. First is the contraction risk, that is, the risk that there will be excess prepayments and the life will contract. Now, excess prepayments normally happen when rates are lower. So the problem here is that, first of all, we get all our money back, and then the money now will be reinvested at this lower rate. So it increases our reinvestment risk, because that high rate that we had locked in, we actually never get to enjoy, because the bond has in effect been called back. Issuing is an MBS is similar to issuing a callable bond. That is, the issuer can call the bond back at its par value, or by paying us back the principal amount, he can extinguish the bond. That is, MBSs, like callable bonds, will also exhibit negative convexity. If interest rates go up, the value of this bond will fall like any normal bond. It will be positive convexity. But when interest rates start falling below a particular level, the value will not rise like a regular bond. The rise will be limited because the homeowners will refinance, or they'll pay us back. So interest rate rise causes the bond value to fall like a regular bond. But interest rate decline does not increase this value. So the duration is a linear estimate. For regular bonds, we studied to get to the exact price, you need to add convexity. So convexity always gets added to the price of the bond is what we have studied for straight bonds. For mortgage-backed securities, if interest rates are falling, then the price rise may not be as high as the duration. Forget adding convexity. The price may just not rise because the issuer will refinance or call the bond back. Hence, we say that MBSs have negative convexity, that is to the duration estimate. Instead of adding, I may need to subtract to get to the value of this bond. So remember, contraction risk is the risk that the life will get reduced or there will be high prepayments. What this will do is that, first of all, there will be negative convexity. So at lower rates, price rise will not be as high. And secondly, I'll be reinvesting this amount also now at a lower rate. Extension risk refers to the drop in bond prices and the slowing of prepayments as interest rate increases. Now when interest rate increases, that's when I want the prepayments actually to be high so that I can get that money and reinvest at this higher rate. But now investors don't prepay. They will prefer to recapture their principal without a capital loss and reinvest at the current higher rates. So even if they have extra money, they won't prepay a low rate loan, they'll invest it themselves at a higher rate. So then the life of the MBS will get extended and the value will fall as interest rates decline because, or rather as interest rates rise, because discounting now starts happening at a higher rate. Remember, mortgage-backed securities behave like callable bonds. That is when interest rates rise, they behave like regular bonds and fall. And when interest rates fall, unfortunately, they don't behave like regular bonds now. That is, the value doesn't go up as much. They exhibit negative convexity. We studied mortgaged pass-through securities. A slight variant of the mortgaged pass-through security is called a collateralized mortgaged obligation. So in CMOs, as we'll see in the coming slides, all we try to do is that instead of keeping that pass-through with all of the same risk, these were mortgages, the SPV structured them and issued new securities on them, and we call them pass-through securities. Pass-through was essentially in the sense that whatever comes is straight up passed to all these investors. Now what we'll try to do is that we'll try to keep some tranches different from the others. The total risk of this MBS or of these securities will be equal to the risk of the underlying. But can we redistribute the risk, making some tranches less risky and other tranches more risky? We'll do that when we structure collateralized mortgage obligations. So these also have an underlying, that is a pool of mortgages. However, to satisfy investor demand, so we find that not a lot of people in the market have average risk. There are people that have very low risk and people that have very high risk. Hence, it may make sense for me to structure these securities as very low risk securities and very high risk securities. Total risk still remains the same as before or as of the underlying. So CMOs are securities issued against a pool of mortgages that's the same, for which the cash flows have been allocated to different classes called tranches. Each tranche has a different claim against the assets of the pool and a different mixture of contraction and extension risk. CMOs can be matched to the unique asset liability needs of investors. So insurance industries or insurance companies generally would not have purchased your pass-through. But as we'll see, a senior tranche they will be allowed to purchase. This is done to satisfy or satiate the requirements of various categories of investors. We'll see the details in the coming slides. The first type of collateralized mortgage obligation that we'll study will be a sequential pay CMO. So this is a common arrangement for separating mortgage class cash flows into classes to create CMOs where each class of bond is required or is retired sequentially. We'll understand with an example. So let's assume that our total mortgage pool has a par value of $250 million. That is, in time, $250 million is going to be paid back with interest. What we do is that we split it into $200 million and $50 million. We'll call this tranche A and the second is tranche B. Both have a coupon rate of 8.5%. The catch is that tranche A gets paid first. That is, no principal repayment will happen to tranche B until tranche A has been paid. Any prepayments, if they come, will all be given to tranche A. If prepayments don't come, then again, whatever is coming will be given first to tranche A. So once this $200 million has been paid off, will tranche B start getting any principal repayment? Interest they will both get. Interest is always equal to outstanding multiplied by 8.5. So for this entire while that B doesn't get paid anything, B will continue to receive a interest of 50 million into 8.5 and A will receive as whatever is outstanding into 8.5. But A gets principal payments first. We'll understand with a further example. The total mortgage pool had a principal outstanding of $250 million. Let's assume that the prepayments every month until the 187th month are given to us. So based on a certain rate of interest, and let's assume a 30-year mortgage, can we compute the PMT? Or can we compute the total amount that will need to be paid to pay off this $250 million mortgage? Yes, we can, the same way that we did our formula. And we can construct an amortization schedule also. So principal payments will keep going up, interest payments will keep coming down of the total payment that we are making. The last column depicts the total cash flow that we receive from this mortgage. That is the principal plus interest plus any prepayment. This is the mortgage pool. This pool doesn't care about how you have tranched it further. This is our $250 million and this is the way that they are coming back. Roughly in about the 186th month, the principal balance comes below $50 million. Why we are bothered about it is because we have tranched these cash flows further into tranche A and tranche B. However, this is the original pool and the way it is getting repaid. So calculate the principal payments, ending principal balance, and interest payments to each tranche in the first month using the following data. The same table has been replicated again for convenience, and you're asked to tell how much would each tranche get at the end of the first month. So let's do it for tranche A first, and then we'll do it for tranche B. Tranche A has an outstanding principal of $200 million. So 200 into 8.5 divided by 12 is what it will get at the end of the first month as interest, which comes out to be $1.41666 million. Tranche A will also get all of the principal repayments until the entire 200 million has been paid off. So at the end of the first month, the outstanding principal will be 200 minus $0.391128 million. That is going to be approximately $199.61 million that will be left as principal in tranche A. for tranche B has an outstanding of 50 million. So 50 into 8.5 divided by 12% is the interest that is due for tranche B, which comes out to be $0.354167 million. You can verify that 1.41666 plus 0.35416 will come out to be approximately equal to $1.770833 million. So of this total interest payment corresponding to $200 million is going to tranche A, and corresponding to $50 million is going to tranche B. The entire principal is going to tranche A. So tranche B gets no principal until tranche A has been fully paid down. Please verify your calculations. In the same example, calculate the principal payments, ending principal balance, and interest payments to each tranche in the 185th month, assuming the principal balance of tranche A is now $405,694 million. So of the 200 million, hardly any is left. Only $0.4 million is now left as principal outstanding for tranche A. So we'll once again see the table, and we're asked to calculate for the 185th month. The beginning principal balance is 50.4 million. 50 million is for tranche B and 0.4 is for tranche A. This is the principal that we get, and this is the interest that we get. Let's again compute the payments to the two tranches. So for tranche A, interest will be the outstanding principal, that is $0.405694 million into 8.5 by 12%. That will come out to be $2,874. So roughly about $3,000 is the interest that this tranche will get. And the principal repaid, so the total principal is 0.536 million. However, outstanding principal for tranche A is only 0.405 million. So the entire 0.405694 will be repaid to tranche A, and whatever is additional will go down now to repay principal for tranche B. So we see that tranche B starts getting paid. The first dollar gets paid in the 185th month. Until that, all money is used to pay down principals of tranche A. So for tranche B, please verify the interest calculation will exactly be the same as earlier, because no principal at the moment has been repaid. The interest amount will be 50 million into 8.5 divided by 12%. That will again come out to be approximately $0.354 million. However, for the first time, tranche B now will start getting paid principal amount to the extent of whatever is remaining. So 536,542 minus 405,694 is what is remaining after tranche A has been fully paid off. So the principal repayment will come out to be $130,848, roughly about $0.13 million or $130,000. So this is a sequential pay CMO, wherein one category of investors are told that you will get paid first, and another category of investors gets paid second. Now, please verify your calculations. Which tranche has a high in our example tranche A and tranche B? Which of the tranches had a high contraction risk? Contraction risk is the risk that it will be paid off too soon. Tranche A has a high contraction risk because principal is first going to tranche A. Which of the tranches has a high extension risk? Tranche B has a high extension risk because if prepayments don't come at any point in time, then tranche A will get affected less because whatever is coming will still go to tranche A, and tranche B will get paid only after tranche A has been paid. So tranche B has a high extension risk while tranche A has a high contraction risk. That's why we were able to do with the same coupon for both tranches and the same par value, because one has a high contraction risk, another has a high extension risk. So depending on which risk you want to take, you can take tranche A or tranche B. It's not necessary that we had to make only two tranches. We could make A, B, C, D also. A gets paid first, B gets paid second, C gets paid third, D gets paid last. So the early tranches are protected against extension risk, while the later tranches are protected against contraction risk. The Z bond, that is the last tranche, has low contraction risk because reinvestment risk is eliminated until the other tranches have been paid off. So 8.5% he will continue to receive until all the other tranches have been paid off. However, there is extension risk, that is principal may get paid back too late. So that was one category or one method in which we could make tranches. But you understand that even the sequential pay structure may not be very palatable for a lot of investors, because there is either too much concentration risk or there is too much extension risk. So an investor maybe wants neither, because I want very little concentration risk also and I want very little extension risk. I am willing to accept a lower yield. You can't have both. You can't have a high yield also and then no risk also. So another investor says that I'm willing to accept this extension risk and contraction risk. Give me a good enough yield. So we can split the cash flows in such a way so as to create senior tranches and support tranches. Senior tranches will have their cash flows predefined. Any shortfalls will be made up by the support tranche. Any excesses, extra prepayments will be paid to the support tranche. So in planned amortization classes, we have a prepayment schedule, or rather a repayment schedule, that is established within a range of prepayment speeds called the initial PSE collar. We'll explain that with an example. Each PSE has a companion or support tranche that has a second priority to the cash flows. If prepayments are too high, the support tranche is paid off faster. If too slow, the support tranche provides the funds needed to keep the planned amortization class on schedule. Let's understand with an example. Whatever the pool of mortgages is, I split the cash flows in such a way that to the senior most tranche, what I guarantee is that if the prepayment speed is anywhere between 100% PSA to 300% PSA, you don't have to worry. I will maintain your life as 6.5 years. That is, I will guarantee your cash flows until prepayment speeds of 100% to 300. If prepayment becomes too low, that is, it becomes 50%, then you will also get extended. This is the senior most tranche or PSE 1 tranche. If prepayments are too high, that is, they are 350 PSA, then you will get contracted. But until 100 to 300 PSA, your average life or your cash flows rather are fixed. And how am I able to guarantee this? With support tranches. So the stability in support tranche comes at the expense of the instability, or the stability in the PSE senior tranche comes at the expense of the instability in the support tranche. So if prepayments are low, then the support tranche will get seriously extended. If prepayments are high, the support tranche will get seriously contracted to provide stability to this senior tranche. That is, any excesses or shortfalls within a particular range are handled by the support tranches. So these investors know they have higher risk. They will invest at a higher yield also. That is, for the same cash flows or same promised cash flows, they'll pay a lower price. The senior tranche for the same promised cash flows will pay a higher price because it knows the risk is also lesser. The reason we do this is that now this PSE 1 tranche will be or becomes like a risk-free security or has a very high credit rating. Credit rating was anyways not a problem. Even the risk rating will be quite high, and a lot of investors, a lot of low-risk investors may be willing to take a stake in these tranches. The high-risk tranches, we can sell them to investment banks or private equity firms or high-yield investors who are willing to take risk, who have the risk appetite, but they want higher returns. So if everything goes as planned, the support tranche may not need to suffer anything, because if everything comes as per their expected prepayment rate, then the PSE 1 tranche will get paid without much trouble to the support tranche. It is in periods of excessive prepayments or excessive decline in prepayments that the support tranche can get seriously extended in the case of decline, or can get seriously contracted in the case of increase in prepayments. Until 100 PSA to 300 PSA of prepayment speed, the senior tranche does not get impacted. So the senior tranches will have low prepayment risk, both extension and contraction, whereas the support tranches will have high prepayment risk, both extension and contraction. Very importantly, stripped mortgage-backed securities differ from traditional pass-throughs in that principal and interest are not allocated on a pro rata basis. That is, to each investor can separately purchase the principal only strip or the interest only strip. At the end of the day, I may be getting fixed payments of $100 from that original mortgage, but a part of that $100 is principal and a part of that $100 is interest. If investors have appetite for principal only strips, that is, this investor will only get the principal payments, high or low, whatever they may be. The second investor will only get the interest payments. If principal doesn't get repaid, interest payments will be high. If excess principal gets paid, principal only strip will get a lot of money, but interest only strip will get less money because he is entitled only to the interest part. So principal only strips are a class of securities that receive only the principal portion of each mortgage payment. The PO exhibits some negative convexity at lower rates. I will explain that in the slide to come. The IO strips are a class that receive only the interest component. The IO price is positively related to mortgage rates at low current rates. That is, as interest rates go up, the prepayments reduce. As interest rates increase, prepayments reduce, hence more will be paid out as interest. PO and IO prices are more volatile than the underlying pass-through. The total price of the mortgage or the mortgage pass-through can be thought of as the price of the principal only strip plus the price of the interest only strip. If I add these two, I will get the price of the total pass-through. Pass-through is nothing but interest and principal. Now let's look at the two strips individually. The principal only investor is only getting the principal components. And please note, we are talking about fixed rate mortgages. Interest rates may vary in the economy. So these market yields may change. This is interest rate in the economy. However, the cash flow or the interest rate on our mortgage remains fixed. The principal only strip is entitled to receive principal only payments. So as interest rates go up, will I receive more prepayments or lesser prepayments? Lesser prepayments. Lesser prepayments means lesser cash flows, or rather more extended cash flows. And on top of it, the discount rate is also going up. So let's assume that on a PO strip earlier I was expecting X1, X2, X3. That is some prepayments I was assuming. And they were being discounted back by the current interest rate in the market. Now what happens is interest rates go up. First of all, these X1 will reduce, X2 will reduce, more payment or prepayment, whatever I was expecting will not happen. Repayments will all get delayed. Secondly, my discount rate has also gone up. I will discount these cash flows also at a higher rate. Cash flows have gotten extended and I will discount them also at a higher rate. So as interest rates go up, the value of principal only strips comes down. Let's similarly understand the characteristics of the interest only strip. So the interest only strip is only receiving the interest payment. Let's assume again that I1, I2, I3 is the interest that I was expecting and it was currently getting discounted back by the rate of interest. As interest rates start to move up, the prepayments will reduce. If the prepayments reduce, the interest that I will receive will go up, because if more is outstanding, then the rate of interest is the same, but the same rate multiplied by higher outstanding principal because of lower prepayments. So the interest rate or the interest that I will receive will go up. However, the discount rate is also going up. These are two opposite factors. Cash flows are going up, but to negate them, rates are also going up. At least during the initial phase of rate increase, we have seen that the cash flow phenomena overtakes the negative impact of the increase in discount rate, such that the value of the interest only strip goes up. However, beyond the point, if interest rates increase, prepayment is anyways not happening. Scheduled principal repayments still have to happen. So do you agree that even if interest rates go up, beyond a point, the speed of repayments cannot reduce? Repayments will reduce, but at some point prepayment will become zero. Let's say rates become 15%. At that point, no prepayments are happening. Now from 15%, when rates go to 16%, will the cash flow change? Because scheduled repayment still has to happen, no? Prepayment is not happening. So anyways, there were no prepayment happening. So after the rates go up from 11 to 12%, this cash flow will not go up. Cash flow will remain the same. However, the discount rate will now go up. The cash flows now remain the same, but the discount rate has gone up. So at very high rates, remember, as interest rates increase, the value of interest only strips start coming down. For the principal only strip, as interest rates go up, value comes down like a regular bond. For interest only strip, it's the other way around. As interest rates go up, the value of interest only strips goes up initially, and then because of the higher discount rate starts to come down. Very important concept, likely to be tested. Make sure you're aware of it and you understand it well. At any point in time, the value of the MBS will be equal to the value of the principal only strip plus the value of the interest only strip. The MBS itself exhibits negative convexity. That is, as interest rates go up, value of the MBS comes down. As interest rates go down, value doesn't go up like a regular bond. It shows negative convexity like a callable bond because people can prepay. Lower rates, they will refinance. They will not let you enjoy that high rate. Non-agency mortgage-backed securities are also mortgage-backed securities, but they are not backed by government agencies. So these are generally low quality borrowers. That is Freddie Mac, Freddie Mae, Ginnie Mae, the US agencies that generally insure mortgages, and that's why we said that they don't have much default risk hitherto. Does not apply for non-agency MBS. So these are generally low quality mortgages. So if you're investing in a pool of non-agency MBSs, then you should be careful about credit risk also, and you see the kind of credit enhancements that have been done when evaluating mortgage pass-throughs on non-agency mortgage-backed securities. Commercial mortgage-backed securities are generally issued against commercial property. It is the rent from that commercial property that is expected to make good the payments of a commercial MBS. If a default occurs, then the lenders have claim on the asset. That is, they can sell the asset and recover the money, unlike a residential mortgage where the claim falls on the individual who has taken the loan. If a default happens on a residential mortgage, then the individual may have to sell assets, or the claim falls on the individual who has to repay you, and you can try to get the money from his other assets or in similar manner. Whereas for commercial mortgage-backed securities, there is no claim on any individual. You are lending against a property. If the loan does not get repaid, you have claim only on that property. So you can seize that property and sell it off, but that's all you can do. Claim does not fall on any individual. So CMBS are structured as non-recourse loans, meaning that the lender can look to the collateral, that is the property itself, as a means to repay the loan if any default happens. In contrast, the residential mortgage lender can go back to the borrower personally in an attempt to repay a delinquent mortgage loan. The analysis of commercial mortgage-backed security structures focuses on two key ratios to assess the credit risk of the property. First is the debt to service coverage ratio, which is simply the operating income that the property is making, or EBIT that the property is making, divided by the debt service. Debt service is loan, that is the principal repayment plus the interest payment. If this ratio is good, that is the operating income from the property is high enough to meet the principal and interest, then you'll be more comfortable giving that loan. And you're also interested in the loan to value ratio. If the total loan is $100 and the value of the property is $300, then again you're not worried because you can sell the property and recover your money. At least your $100 is not a big problem. But if the loan is 100 and the value of the property is 110, then you may want to be more careful, because when you go out to sell, you may not get the price to recover your loan. Now we understand that the prepayment option in mortgage-backed securities is like a call option with the issuer. That is, he can buy the bond back, or he can repay the principal and extinguish the loan. So methods that restrict these prepayments or that restrict this calling back of the bond are referred to as call protection. In commercial mortgage-backed securities, generally we can put in a lot of call protection. In residential mortgage-backed securities, this call protection is not allowed by the government or by the regulator. That is, individuals are allowed to prepay their loans. What we can do in commercial mortgage-backed securities more easily is that have a prepayment lockout. That is, the borrower cannot repay the loan for this period of time. We can also have defeasance. That is, even if he prepays, that prepaid amount will not be used to reduce the principal. That prepaid amount will be put in government securities and an interest will be earned on that. that can be given to the borrower or to whoever has prepaid, but the loan will be prepaid according to its schedule. That's a defeasance clause, that the money will be used as collateral. If he defaults, then again I have some extra money that he has paid, but it will not amount to prepayment. Prepayment will happen as per schedule. That extra money will be kept in low risk securities or treasury securities. Penalty fees may be applied for prepayment. Yield maintenance charges may be applied. That is, you can make the prepayment if you like. However, I will apply a charge so as to ensure my yield doesn't get diluted. So in that way, the borrower is indifferent between prepaying or not prepaying. Even if he prepays, he knows that it's not that he's going to save anything, because the bank will levy a charge such that the bank's yield is protected. As the CMBS pool level, cash prepayments are assigned to tranches, which mitigates the amount of prepayment risk of the more senior tranches. So once again, the tranching that we saw in residential mortgages can also be done for commercial mortgage-backed securities. So it's in the same way we could have PSC tranches, sequential pay tranches in CMBS like we had for residential mortgages. Remember, commercial mortgages are on commercial properties where recourse is to the property. So that's about the first reading on mortgage-backed securities. We'll study more about mortgage-backed securities in the coming sessions.